Have you ever noticed that the pacing, tone, and story development of Pokemon changes after Ash is hit by lightning in the early episodes? How Ash and his world are relatively normal until after that incident. I have a theory. The accident with the bike put Ash into a coma. Days later, he was found and hurried to the hospital and treated with heavy medications. This is why Team Rocket became less menacing. The medication took effect and stabilized his coma dreams so that, instead of being terrifying, they became idyllic. They allowed him to live out his Pokemon Master fantasies. After the beginning episodes, the series is the result of Ash's subconscious mind fulfilling his desires as well as attempting to escape reality. Should Ash realize he's in a coma, he would wake up and suffer brain damage, so he must take down all of his mental barriers one by one. If he can do that, he can come to grips with who he is and escape his coma. Further evidence comes from the realization that, even though his journeys take him vast distances, he never usually travels by bike due to having developed a phobia of them. The coma and fantasy explains why he never changes much, physically. It explains the worldwide socialism, as he thought up a safe system of government that would run smoothly and keep the world going, allowing his adventures to work like they do. It also explains how a child can go off on his own into a world full of dangerous and untamed animals. In addition, it explains why every town has the same police officer and every Pokemon Center has the same nurse. Joy and Jenny he knew from his hometown and they act as a safety net or anchor, allowing him to feel safe no matter where he goes. They represent stability. The professors represent Ash's ideals, which is why Gary became a professor. The fantasy also explains why every time he enters a new region that virtually no one has heard of him, despite his conquests. How else could Paul, the rival of the Sinnoh area, not know of someone who placed in at least the top 16 of all 3 leagues and destroyed the Orange League and Battle Frontier? Moving on to the characters closer to him. Ash's traveling partners are aspects of himself he can enjoy but cannot associate with himself. Brock is Ash's repressed sexuality. Ash fell into the coma a virgin and, as such, needed an outlet for his growing sexual frustrations. However, since he can never experience sex, Brock must never succeed. Brock's stay with Professor Ivy was an attempt by Ash's mind to suppress his sexuality. Brock isn't just a projection of Ash's sexuality, but also a projection of Ash's fatherly instincts. He leaves his siblings to journey with Ash, because he can't cope with having that much responsibility. You may notice that James got much more dialogue in this part of the series, as well as getting more touchy-feely with his Pokemon and exposing much of his backstory. Ash didn't enjoy this much, which is why Brock returns, horrified, and refuses to speak about it. Ash's subconscious was repressing him at the time, so, other than a general feeling of dread, he has no idea what happened. Further evidence of Brock being Ash's sexuality is that he keeps returning the series after Ash meets a new female aspect of himself. Misty is the first such aspect we encounter. Because she is the first and is merely an aspect of Ash are explanations as to why Misty plays such a prominent role in the show but is ultimately unattainable, since he never really knew her before the coma. Since Misty is his initial love interest, if only subconsciously, he needed her to reach a certain level of womanhood. He felt that people could only have relationships after they've matured. In practice, however, he finds he can't cope with it, as he lacks real-world experience. He wants the normal, pushy, arrogant Misty he knew. Thus, not letting her keep to GP. We can see this arc in the constant berating of his sexuality, but her eventual mellowing, until she had faded into the background. Since Ash was quite attached to her, this was traumatizing. After this experience, anyone around him threatening to mature quickly ends up leaving only for another, more naive fill-in to enter his life. Gary Oak is what Ash wants to be. He is wish fulfillment. He succeeded and then settled down to a normal life. Ash needs someone to succeed in his world or he won't be able to validate it and will start questioning why he is where he is. It's a subconscious trap to keep him from becoming too aware of his situation. His mind must have figured out that awareness of the coma would snap him out of it, so it took something the boy already loved and built a way out for him with it. However, Ash is too complacent to make a final stand and fight his way out of it, and cannot escape. This is why he keeps encountering legendary Pokemon. They're his mind's way of showing him he can do great things, if he tries. It's a way to encourage him to push forwards. Team Rocket are the qualities of himself that Ash deems negative, but is coming to terms with. Jesse and James want to appease Giovanni, Ash's father figure. To achieve this, Jesse will trick the submissive James into doing her bidding. Meowth especially wants to appease him, because he remembers the good times with Giovanni. This places Meowth in a category known as Ash's corrupted innocence. This is apparent, because Meowth is able to speak. In fact, the whole reason Meowth can speak is so Ash can eventually accept the aspects of Team Rocket as parts of himself. Ash had issues with his father, so he put him atop the evil corporation and demonized him. There may be an actual Team Rocket in the real world, but it's doubtful that Ash's father is their leader. Ash likely feels the split between his parents was partly his fault, but also partly blames his father. The split caused his mother to move out of the city down to Pallet Town and is one reason why Ash initially embarks on his journey to escape the turmoil at home. The whole organization, including Butch and Cassidy, is symbolic of his inability to escape his father's machinations. James is implied homosexuality, which does not necessarily make Ash homosexual, and gullibility, while Jesse is vanity and manipulation. Since Meowth has the potential for rehabilitation and doesn't want to be evil, this once again fits with the conflicting personalities and demonized self-theory. Team Rocket cross-dresses, because Ash is exploring his gender, a different facet than what Brock represents, sexuality, and this was a method that allowed his gay/vain side to experiment freely. When he found that it wasn't something for him, he free-side stopped playing with it. Max came with May. He played the ego and she played the id with great aspirations in that session. They worked for a little while, but with Ash being a teenager, his sexuality had to come back into play. He kept reinventing himself and eventually wrote new aspects, but his mind slowly brought the old ones back, as a crutch to make the transition easier. Dawn is Ash giving himself a chance to love. Since he already established Misty as someone he's not likely to go anywhere with, he created a new super female, one that was more like him and less violent. You may note that, while both May and Misty had no tolerance for Brock's behavior, Dawn seems to try to shrug it off. Tracy, the breeder, was a possible future for Ash that he discarded. This future was one that he sent off to work with the professor, Ash's ultimate ideal of a father figure, when Tracy disrupted the dynamic Ash had with his other possibilities. With Ash's mind fighting the coma and Ash viewing this person as a companion, Tracy was quickly replaced with a more threatening rival. Pikachu represents Ash's humanity. This explains the episodes where they get separated and Ash desperately wants to find him, even to the point of working with Team Rocket, aspects of himself he would never normally associate with, but for some reason cannot. Team Rocket wants to steal Pikachu and hand him over to Giovanni. Jesse and James will always oppose Ash, because he is terrified of the thought of his humanity lying in the hands of his father. However, this is the same reason he will work with those aspects of himself in order to save his humanity. Ash couldn't evolve Pikachu, because that would mean challenging his concept of who he was, which was something he wasn't comfortable with, while still working through his original issues. The narrator is Ash's higher mind, recapping and explaining the progress he's made and the tribulations he will face, allowing insight into how to best awaken him. Team Rocket's methods gradually become more and more ludicrous, because Ash is only a child dreaming these things up. That is why Team Rocket's disguises are always believed. He knows it's them, at least on a subconscious level, but chooses to ignore it so he can better himself. In a sense, the Ash who wants to escape is sabotaging the Ash who wants to stay lost in his mind, so that there can be more conflict and, hopefully, an eventual escape. The escape is a consequence of coming to terms with who he is. As mentioned previously, Team Rocket are a method to Ash to deal with grounds he's uncomfortable with tackling on his own. You may recall that early in the show, there were animals and references to animals. For example, the fish in the aquarium of the Cerulean City Gym, or that the Pokédex lists Pikachu as rat-like. These animals don't matter to Ash's psyche, so they don't come into play much. If Ash loved puppies, everything would be about different breeds of dogs and a dog fighting circuit, but as the series goes on, you see fewer realistic animals and more Pokemon. This could be a sign of Ash's mind deteriorating. As he's in the coma, he's losing concepts of some animals and machinery and replacing them with Pokemon. It could explain things like electric Pokemon working as power generators. These are signs that his memory of the old world is slipping more and more as time goes by. The Pokemon realm will be idealized continuously the longer he has no stimulus from the real world. Ash may or may not be mentally deteriorating, but he is becoming more accustomed to his fake world's rules. The wild Pokemon are his rationalizations for the functioning of his created fantasy. It's the "a wizard did it" syndrome. If he doesn't know how it works, his mind says Pokemon. The Pokemon in Ash's team, however, serve the purpose of displaying his issues and aspects of himself. For example, Charmander represents his sex drive, not his sexuality, like Brock. At first it's a cute, easy thing to control, but eventually becomes a raging inferno of disobedience, since Ash has no real understanding of his sexuality, thus has no way to vent or keep it in check. Bulbasaur was his unwillingness to change, reflected in when it declines to evolve and almost decided to stay behind, unless he battled it. Squirtle was his willingness to follow the lead of others, as evidenced by the gang it ran with. Even though he ran the gang, they were viewed as one group and Ash's subconscious gave him the strongest one. Butterfree was his crushing loneliness, which he dealt with when he released it to join a flock. His bird types are his recklessness, always willing to sacrifice something at a moment's notice for the win. When Ash is trading Pokemon, it's an attempt to push his own problems away on someone else. However, he realizes this and usually trades back very quickly. Not only are Ash's Pokemon a manifestation of different parts of himself, the Pokemon of other trainers are as well. Koffing and Ekans were symbolic of Team Rocket's willingness to change, hence their evolutions. Once his mind was able to overcome that roadblock and allow them to change once, it gave him the chance to truly change. An interesting note is that Pupitar is a rationalization, a Pokemon a rival caught before they met. Even Ash would become suspicious if everyone he met had no carryover Pokemon from previous places he had been to. Other trainers are more direct forms of his issues, ones he must either come to terms with or outright suppress. Gym leaders are more primary aspects of his personality, with each Pokemon being stronger than the last to display a level of skill he could only be capable of if he gave into it. In effect, he is doing battle with a part of him that he would rather not have in control. Originally, Ash had the battles, which evolved into team battles and contests. The explanation for this is that his issues became more and more complicated and the means of dealing with them needed to become more complex. The fact that he uses issues he has already dominated to win is a sign he's growing stronger. Ash releases his Pokemon because his mind is forcing him to let go of them. The second he raises an overpowered team, a tournament comes up and, after fighting his way through it, he has to go to a new land for new challenges. However, with an overpowered team, there won't be any challenges or any way to motivate him further. The Ash that wants to stay in the coma and keep journeying hands his solved issues over to Professor Oak so he can continue and overcome the unresolved ones. This is essentially his mind forcing him to deal with his issues. Ash's rivals and the Elite Four are ultimately the strongest part of this cycle. Having Pokemon that are essentially godlike, they represent both what can be attained and what is unattainable. Ash's rivals are all possible futures he envisions for himself. Note they are all older than him. This originated with Gary Oak, someone Ash knew from real life and built up into a sort of god within his mind. However, Gary progressed and changed to suit Ash's vision of himself and his ultimate desire, eventually settling down into a professor role after beating the Elite Four. With Gary Oak in retirement, his mind needed a new rival for him. Thus the births of Richie, the good aspect of his rivalry, and Paul. Paul is his mind's last-ditch efforts to snap him out of it, to force Ash to actually come to terms that this perfect world is not the best option or path to waking up. Paul is Ash's shadow, one that wants to push on even harder and harder. He is the part of Ash that will stop at nothing to escape the coma world. Mewtwo is a new form of treatment, done with electrical impulses and a machine to know Ash out of it, taking down every last one of his mental guards, the original Pokemon in the movie. In Ash's mind, Mewtwo and his clones were, in the real world, the treatment for the mental safeguards that were protecting Ash and keeping him comatose, the Pokemon of his world. The clones were counters to the issues Ash had thought solved and each appeared to Ash as the exact copy of his defense. The clones didn't play by the rules of Ash's world. They didn't use any special attacks or moves. They just beat down their counterparts through brute strength. The treatment was working. There were side effects. The electric jolts were beginning to affect Ash's nervous system. If the treatment continued, he would be paralyzed. His mind manifested this in the dream world by petrifying him. Were it not for the end of the treatment by Ash's mother, who knew her son wouldn't want to live in a world he couldn't explore, Ash would have remained as stone forever. After this, Ash needed to recover from the damage caused by the electric therapy. In order to reduce the danger Ash's consciousness felt from it, his subconscious began downplaying the effects in this world, which is why Pikachu's electric attacks, once noted for their strength by Team Rocket, no longer have any effect on Ash, other than comic relief. As we can see, Ash may well have been trapped forever in this world. However, like every dream, like everything, there is a beginning and an end. What would happen if Ash never recovered? In his hospital room, we see Delia, obviously distraught. She's talking to a doctor with a grim look on his face. The man is saying their insurance is up and the boy has had no change in brain activity in years. The shock of taking him off life support has a very small chance of awakening him. She tearfully agrees. Back in Ash's world, he has finally defeated the Elite Four and, one by one, the people around him disappear. Eventually, everything is black. Pikachu comes dashing toward him, glowing brighter and brighter in the darkness. Eventually, he reaches Ash and the two embrace one last time. In the hospital room, his life signs fading, Ash mutters his final words. I want to be the very best. He will die never having known his dream, except as naught but a dream. When he came back to reality, He knew it all for the lie it was, knew it as his imagination. Knowing that all his efforts, ambitions, and friends were nothing, he will let go. As he utters his final words, he barely opens his eyes and sees the silhouette of his mother, her face hidden by her hands wiping away tears. They make eye contact and one final realization fills him, before he loses all strength. He sees that his mother was holding out hope, that he'd recover all that time. He sees her and finds that her hope had been broken, as she'd come to the realization that she'd outlived her only child. He dies knowing that he is loved, but that it means the one person closest and most real to him is utterly crushed. Still, there are other possibilities. The fountain of time flows in mysterious ways. One could not go back against the current, such as Gatsby. However, one could never see what is waiting for him downstream. Ash finally defeats Lens, only to be confronted by not Gary Oak, but a mute mirror image of himself. The voice of the narrator speaks to him, telling him that now he can finally escape the prison of his own mind. One by one, his friends appear and melt away into more copies of himself, cheering him on. After a long, tough battle against himself with the assistance of all his Pokemon he had ever befriended, he jolts awake. In his hospital room, he sees his parents, asleep. He finds himself unable to speak. Ash pushes forward toward his recovery. He goes through physical therapy, training harder and harder with rehabilitative Pokemon, until he can walk on his own again. This time, an older and wiser Ash sets out on a journey. Just like last time, he's late getting to Professor Oak's laboratory. When there's only one Pokemon left, he suddenly recalls all his memories of his life and realizes all his friends are gone forever. As he sets out with his new companion, he finds the world is darker than he imagined. More real. Pokemon and people die. He, too, has aged. He vows to become the Pokemon master he dreamed he was. He vows to himself. He vows to them.
I wanna be the very best, like no one ever was. To catch them is my real test, to train them is my cause. I will travel across the land, searching far and wide.
In the red and green versions of the Pokemon video game for the Nintendo Game Boy system, there have been reported rumors circulating the internet of Lavender Town Syndrome. The phenomena is described as occurring when the player is within Lavender Town, a small area with a paranormal theme including ghosts, ghost-themed Pokemon, and a tower constructed for the purpose of housing deceased Pokemon. The music in the area, which was later quickly changed for a second release, contains binaural beats which can induce psychological effects on the listener. These subtle beats comprise the so-called Lavender Town tone. For a description of the effects on Japanese children which played this first edition, I shall quote from the page with information on the subject. Readers should note that most but not all of the information on the page is factually sound. It was not until around spring or summer of 1996 that the cases that would eventually become linked to the Lavender Town tone began to surface. The earliest record of the acknowledgement of the effects of the Lavender Town tone that the author could find came from an internal report made in June 1996 by the company Game Freak Incorporated, which was then leaked by one of its former employees, Ms. Satoharu. In it, an employee gives a list of names, dates and symptoms, records of children between the ages of 7 and 12 who had suffered various medical problems as a result of playing Pocket Monsters, red and green versions. April 12, 1996. 11-year-old girl. Name. Unknown. Obstructive sleep apnea, severe migraines, autorrhagia, tinnitus. Attacked a police officer near a government building and was killed. May 23, 1996. 12-year-old boy. Name. Shida Hiromi. General irritability, insomnia, addiction to video games, nosebleeds. Developed into violent streaks against others and eventually himself. April 27, 1996. 11-year-old girl. Name. Peachwell. Cluster headaches, irritability. Self-harmed and carved the kanji symbols for empire into his wrists, then died. March 4, 1996. 7-year-old boy. Name. Unknown. Migraines, sluggish and slow behavior, unresponsiveness. Developed into deafness, and went missing. Body discovered beside road April 20, 1996. Hundreds of Japanese children fell victim to these effects, many of them committing suicide eventually. As you can see, these binaural beats lead to many problems, including symptoms of brain hemorrhaging and violent actions against others. The article also mentions a ghost animation which appears throughout the tower. It supposedly displays static pictures of screaming faces, the Grim Reaper, and photographs of corpses along with the standard ghost model itself. While the rest of the paragraph itself is fiction, no such games commission board ever held the programmers on trial. There is some truth behind this ghost animation. In the recalled first edition of the games, in which the Lavender Town tone was present, hidden in the game's code is an unnamed Pokemon only identified by its assigned number. 731. The Pokemon can only be found in two places. One is depicted in Figure 1, Route 7. The 31st tile of grass, which is boxed with red in the picture, has a 100% chance of entering a battle with Pokemon 731. It is unknown whether this is due to the game's code itself or it was purposely put there by programmers. Another way to find it is to use the Missing No glitch. The Missing No glitch involves having an old man show you how to catch a Pokemon. Due to old man taking the place of your character's name in the game's memory, your character's name is moved to the memory, which determines what wild Pokemon are shown. On Cinnabar Island there is a narrow strip of land in which wild Pokemon can be caught, but it has no specific Pokemon assigned to it. Therefore, a Pokemon which corresponds to the hex value of your name will appear. If your character is named G, C, A, in lowercase letters, you will encounter Pokemon 731. The Pokemon itself is strange in nature. It does indeed use the ghost sprite, along with some flashing static. However, about 20 frames in it becomes a flashing series of low-quality pictures. Two of the clearest ones have been included, Figures 2, 3, and 4. Figure 2 appears to be a man standing over a table upon which something hard to identify, a corpse perhaps, rests. He has his hands on this unknown object and also has what may be a surgical mask over his mouth. This strengthens the theory that it is a body in the frame. Figure 3 appears to be a low-resolution image of a building, the significance of which will be explained later. Figure 4 is possibly one of the strangest images, a picture of the Imperial Japanese flag with the two kanji symbols that mean Emperor in the bottom right corner. Other frames of the animation that can be made out include more images of doctors, corpses, and buildings. The theme from Lavender Town plays the whole time during the battle, although accelerated 3 times faster. If one attempts to catch the Pokemon, the game will freeze. After restarting, the title screen of the game will have been modified, displaying only static and the tone accelerated to the blistering pace of 10 times faster. What is the purpose of this Pokemon? What is the significance of the number 731? Were the binaural beats comprising the Lavender Town tone inserted into the music on purpose? The answers require a look at some of the staff of Game Freak, the company which developed the game for Nintendo. Game Freak, a Japanese video game developer founded in 1989 by Satoshi Tajiri, the one who created the Pokemon series. Shin Nakamura, who was married Sato Hara with a 6-year-old child, Ken Nakamura, worked there as a programmer. Ms. Haru, who leaked the list of children affected by the Lavender Tone, was trained in musical skills and in charge of sound design. In order to gather more information on this subject, I traveled to Japan to interview Ms. Haru, who now lives in the small town of Toma, in the Kamikawa district of the Hokkaido prefecture. Initially unwilling to answer my questions, she finally relented and gave me the information I desired. The reason she had leaked the list of children was partially due to personal guilt. Mr. Nakamura had asked to tweak the Lavender Town theme. Ms. Haru accepted and Mr. Nakamura added the tone, telling Ms. Haru that he decided that it was fine as it was and did not add anything. Because the tone is not audible for those over the age of 12, Ms. Haru believed Mr. Nakamura. In the middle of the night, after the game was released, Mr. Nakamura committed suicide in a Otagahara forest by hanging himself on a tree, leaving a letter addressed to Ms. Haru below him. Their son Ken was killed in an automobile accident down the road from their house, naked, with several cracked ribs, frothing at the mouth and heavily bleeding from his nose due to a brain hemorrhage. The two kanji symbols for Emperor were also carved into his chest. The story that Ms. Haru told me was that, while Ken was sleeping, Mr. Nakamura put headphones on his son and played the Lavender Tone, then left. Eventually their son woke up and, due to the effects of the tone, cut the symbols into himself with a kitchen knife, then attempted to attack the passengers of a nearby car. Frightened, they ran over him and then drove off. Unfortunately, her story was not accepted by police, although the bloody kitchen knife was present in his bedroom. Ms. Haru has agreed to allow me to release a revealing passage from Mr. Nakamura's letter, with the rest omitted due to personal reasons. It is as follows.
Dear Satu, tonight is the eve of a new era for Japan, a new empire of which I am responsible. I cannot, however, linger to see my creation unfold within the coming months. Visions of my father's work haunt me. Our dear Ken will be the first martyr for the empire, followed by many other children as our disgraceful society collapses, uprooted by its own young. A phoenix will rise from the ashes, the second great imperial Japanese nation.
This passage makes it obvious that Mr. Nakamura's goal was to create a second great imperial Japanese nation by using the newly released Pokemon games. He hoped that the Lavender Tone, which causes violence against the victims themselves and others, would turn all of the children who purchased the game into warriors for the Empire. But what explains the pictures on the ghost animation, and what was his father's work? Unit 731 was a secretive unit of the Japanese Army under the Empire of Japan during World War II. It was dedicated to biological and chemical research, also delving into human experimentation. It is infamous for its many war crimes. It consisted of several divisions. Division 1, Research on bubonic plague, cholera, anthrax, typhoid and tuberculosis using live human subjects. For this purpose, a prison was constructed to contain around 300 to 400 people. Division 2, Research for biological weapons used in the field, in particular the production of devices to spread germs and parasites. Division 3, Production of shells containing biological agents. Stationed in Harbin. Division 4, Production of other miscellaneous agents. Division 5, Training of personnel. Divisions 6 to 8, Equipment, Medical and Administrative units. Under Division 4 worked Koshu Nakamura, the father of Shin Nakamura. According to Ms. Haru, he was a very conservative man, had an imperial flag on his wall and followed all traditions. He was stuck in the former half of the century. If we delve further into records, we find that Toshu Nakamura worked in Division 4. He held the title of Director of Experimentation relating to audio engineering. From here we can only speculate what responsibilities that title held, but one can guess that the lavender tone was engineered there between the screams of vivisected patients and the smoke of burning bodies. Now recall figures 2 and 3. As figure 2 pictures a man in a surgical mask holding a body, it was likely taken by Mr. Nakamura himself at the faculty. Figure 3 looks similar to the main entrance to the facility. We can gather that the rest of the photos are patients of Unit 731 and buildings of the facility. The effects themselves were certainly not as great as Mr. Nakamura hoped. There is no second Japanese empire, but only a few hundred Japanese children, who died in fits of insane rage against government officials and themselves, he is responsible for. This is mainly thanks to the quick actions of Ms. Hera and Game Freak at removing the tone and the secret code and images which Mr. Nakamura implemented into the game. Mr. Nakamura also neglected to foresee that the effects were hardly present at all without the use of headphones during the Lavender Town segment specifically. The quiet and fast recall by Nintendo is also a contributing factor. Pokemon continues to be a popular worldwide series of video games. Sadly, the government, possibly by the request of Nintendo, has neglected to acknowledge the connection between the lost children and the Pokemon games. The information Ms. Hera leaked has been all but erased from any records. Only one copy of the list remains at her home. I'd like to thank Ms. Hera greatly for complying with my requests, supplying nearly all the information in this article, and providing a rare copy, possibly the only one left, of first edition Pokemon for investigation purposes. Ms. Hera continues to live alone with her 2 cats in Toma, Hokkaido, working as a store clerk. She left Game Freak shortly after her husband's suicide and her child's death. Sadly, she has all but given up trying to spread awareness of the events, which led to the loss of her child. Update. Ms. Hera passed away from leukemia on May 3, 2001. This page is now dedicated to her. May she rest in peace.
I'm what you could call a collector of bootleg Pokemon games. Pokemon Diamond and Jade, Chaos Black, etc. It's amazing the frequency with which you can find them at pawn shops, Goodwill, flea markets, and such. They are generally fun, even if they are unplayable, which they often are. The mistranslations and poor quality make them unintentionally humorous. I've been able to find most of the ones that I've played online, but there's one that I haven't seen any mention of. I bought it at a flea market about 5 years ago. Here's a picture of the cartridge, in case anyone recognizes it. Unfortunately, when I moved 2 years ago, I lost the game, so I can't provide you with screen caps. Sorry. The game started with the familiar Nidorino and Jengar intro of Red and Blue version. However, the press start screen had been altered. Red was there, but the Pokemon did not cycle through. It also said Black version under the Pokemon logo. Upon selecting New Game, the game started the Professor Oak speech, and it quickly became evident that the game was essentially Pokemon Red version. After selecting your starter, if you looked at your Pokemon, you had in addition to Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle. However, there was another Pokemon, Ghost. The Pokemon was level 1. It had the sprite of the ghosts that are encountered in Lavender Tower before obtaining the Sliff Scope. It had 1 attack. Curse. I know that there is a real move named Curse, but the attack did not exist in Generation 1, so it appears it was hacked in. Defending Pokemon were unable to attack Ghost, it would only say they were too scared to move. When the move Curse was used in battle, the screen would cut to black. The cry of the defending Pokemon would be heard, but it was distorted, played at a much lower pitch than normal. The battle screen would then reappear, and the defending Pokemon would be gone. If used in a battle against a trainer, when the Pokeballs representing their Pokemon would appear in the corner, they would have one fewer Pokeball. The implication was that the Pokemon died. What's even stranger is that after defeating a trainer and seeing Red received $200 for winning, the battle commands would appear again. If you selected Run, the battle would end, as it normally does. You could also select Curse. If you did, upon returning to the overworld, the trainer's sprite would be gone. After leaving and re-entering the area, the spot where the trainer had been would be replaced with a tombstone like the ones at Lavender Tower. The move Curse was not usable in all instances. It would fail against Ghost Pokemon. It would also fail if it was used against trainers that you would have to face again, such as your rival or Giovanni. It was usable in your final battle against them, however. I figured this was the gimmick of the game, allowing you to use the previously uncapturable ghosts. And because Curse made the game so easy, I essentially used it throughout the whole adventure. The game changed quite a bit after defeating the Elite Four. After viewing the Hall of Fame, which consisted of Ghost and a couple of Pokemon I used for HMs, the screen cut to black. A box appeared with the words, "Many years later." It then cut to Lavender Tower. An old man was standing, looking at tombstones. You then realized this man was your character. The man moved at only half of your normal walking speed. You no longer had any Pokemon with you, not even Ghost, who up to this point had been impossible to remove from your party through depositing in the PC. The overworld was entirely empty. There were no people at all. There were still the tombstones of the trainers that you used Curse on, however. You could go pretty much anywhere in the overworld at this point, though your movement was limited by the fact that you had no Pokemon to use HMs. And regardless of where you went, the music of Lavender Town continued on an infinite loop. After wandering for a while, I found that, if you go through Diglett's cave, one of the cuttable bushes that normally blocks the path on the other side is no longer there, allowing you to advance and return to Pallet Town. Upon entering your house and going to the exact tile where you start the game, the screen would cut to black. Then a sprite of a Caterpie appeared. It was replaced by a Weedle, and then a Pidgey. I soon realized, as the Pokemon progressed from Rattata to Blastoise, that these were all of the Pokemon that I had used Curse on. After the end of my rival's team, a youngster appeared, and then a bug catcher. These were the trainers I had cursed. Throughout the sequence, the Lavender Town music was playing, but it was slowly decreasing in pitch. By the time your rival appeared on screen, it was little more than a demonic rumble. Another cut to black. A few moments later, the battle screen suddenly appeared. Your trainer sprite was now that of an old man, the same one as the one who teaches you how to catch Pokemon in Viridian City. Ghost appeared on the other side, along with the words, "Ghost wants to fight." You couldn't use items, and you had no Pokemon. If you tried to run, you couldn't escape. The only option was fight. Using fight would immediately cause you to use struggle, which didn't affect Ghost but did chip off a bit of your own HP. When it was Ghost's turn to attack, it would simply say. Eventually, when your HP reached a critical point, Ghost would finally use Curse. The screen cut to black a final time. Regardless of the buttons you pressed, you were permanently stuck in this black screen. At this point, The only thing you could do was turn the Game Boy off. When you played again, New Game was the only option. The game had erased the file. I played through this hacked game many times, and every time the game ended with this sequence. Several times I didn't use Ghost at all, though he was impossible to remove from the party. In these cases, it did not show any Pokemon or trainers and simply cut to the climactic battle with Ghost. I'm not sure what the motives were behind the creator of this hack. It wasn't widely distributed, so it was presumably not for monetary gain. It was very well done for a bootleg. It seems he was trying to convey a message, though it seems I am the sole receiver of this message. I'm not entirely sure what it was, the inevitability of death? The pointlessness of it? Perhaps he was simply trying to morbidly inject death and darkness into a children's game. Regardless, this children's game has made me think, and it has made me cry.